I met Malia at a hostel in the Golan Heights of Israel a while back. During the month I spent in Israel, I had wanted to hike part of the Israel National Trail, but couldn't find a guide company to assist me in figuring out the logistics. Malia, however, had decided to tackle the entire 680-mile, 1,100-kilometer trail all on her own that winter. So I asked her to come and tell us about it when she returned. Today, Malia and I discuss Israel's National Trail, commonly referred to as INT. We will learn how she navigated the trail, how challenging it was, what she saw, who she met, and how she got her intel so she would know how to tackle her upcoming leg. It's a fascinating discussion, and I can't wait to share it with you. So let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. Before we begin with my interview with Malia, let me tell you a little bit about the INT trail itself. As I said, this 680, 1,100-kilometer trail runs north to south from the Golan Heights near the Lebanese border, down through the mountains, through the desert canyons, into Jerusalem, Masada, and the Dead Sea, terminating at the coast of Eliat on the Gulf of Aqaba, which empties into the Red Sea. I should note that from Eliat, you aren't really too far from Wadi Rum and Petra, which is a stunning area in Jordan. I covered my own Jordan adventure in episode 70. I'll put a link in the show notes. So if you're anywhere, if you've got the time, Jordan's very inexpensive, pop on over there and check it out. It's some of the most beautiful landscape and friendliest people I've ever met in the world. Now back to the Israel National Trail. Only about 10,000 hikers cover the trail each year, and only about 40% of them are through hiking it like Malia did. Most are doing section hikes of it. On this trail, you're going to be backpacking, and I suggest you go as light as possible. I'll put links in the show notes to my companion podcast, the Adventure Travel Show podcast, on episodes that I covered on backpacking, ultralight backpacking, etc. On the INT, the hiking season runs from October through May, with the best weather in the spring. You'll have a greater chance of rain in the winter months. On the travel planner, I'll have links to the weather throughout Israel. Most people who hike the INT take between 45 and 60 days to do so. After my interview with Malia, if you're interested, stay tuned because I'll have some more details, a little bit more of the nitty-gritty that you need to know before you go. Now please enjoy my conversation with Malia. So I have with us Malia today, and she and I met at a hostel in Israel, and she told me that she was going to be walking Israel's National Trail. So welcome to the program, Malia.
Thank you. I'm happy to be on.
And before we get started, let's wind up a little bit. And can you tell us a little bit about your hiking history? Had you ever done anything like this at all?
No, the longest hike that I've done before this was 4 days. And so this was just kind of going all in and seeing how I could handle it. But in terms of my hiking history outside of this, I've done quite a bit of hiking. I grew up in Montana, and from there I moved to California, Utah, Alaska, and so I've been in quite a few different outdoor places where I've had lots of hiking opportunities.
So what made you say, okay, I'm going to take on, instead of 4 days, I'm going to go, this is like a 45 to 60 day hike. What made you take that mental leap to say, oh, I want to do that?
It was something that had been kind of on my mind for a while, to do a long hike. And of course, coming from the US, people always think of the Pacific Crest Trail or the Appalachian Trail, different things like that. And those ones are 2,600 miles or so. So that was a bigger commitment. I was looking for something a little bit smaller, and I had this opportunity to go to Israel. And I was kind of looking at traveling for around 6 months or so. And I was just thinking, what could I do in a longer period of time that could fill up some of that travel time? And I came across the Israel National Trail when I was doing research, and things just kind of worked out. I packed my bags with my tent, sleeping bag, everything I needed, and I headed off to Israel.
So that was the reason you went to Israel. So you weren't in Israel and decided to do it. So you already had all your gear with you. You knew you were going to do that when you got to Israel?
I did.
Okay.
It wasn't necessarily the reason I went to Israel. I had an opportunity to go. And I just decided that I wanted to spend a longer period of time in Israel and just kind of filled that space with this hike.
Very cool. Well, that's exciting. So had you ever backpacked before, or just when you did the 4 day hike, was that a backpacking trip?
Yeah, I've done a couple of backpacking trips. I did maybe 3 or 4 backpacking trips before this.
but nothing to the extent, like I said, you had said it was almost like a long weekend before this.
Right.
Okay, so why don't we tell people exactly what the Israel National Trail is?
Yeah, so the Israel National Trail it's 1,100 kilometers. It's a little under 700 miles long, and it goes from the northern border of Israel, which is just a couple kilometers from the border of Lebanon, and it finishes 1 kilometer away from the border of Egypt on the Red Sea. It crosses through the mountains of Israel, through archaeological sites, through the desert, along the beach by the Dead Sea, basically sees all of Israel. And so it's typically done more commonly by Israelis as sort of like a pilgrimage trip before or after they go into the army or after they graduate high school, finish the army, whatever it may be. But currently it's becoming a lot more popular with international travelers as well, because it was recently recognized as one of the top 20 epic hikes in the world. And so I think a lot of people internationally are coming to check it out also.
I was going to ask you this later, but since we're talking about it now, tell us about the people you met along the trail.
The people along the trail were amazing. I kind of did it in off season, and so I didn't meet too many other hikers necessarily, but the hikers that I did meet were typically Israelis. I also met quite a few German travelers because I guess, I don't know.
Germans are everywhere. They hike. They're everywhere. I've never been on a trail. I haven't met a German.
But outside of the hikers, more commonly I met what they call trail angels. And so it was people that have houses or places to stay that are close to the trail, and they open their house to the hikers specifically doing this trail, and they'll offer you a room maybe, or a couch, or their backyard, whatever it may be. And if they have the opportunity to, they offer you a shower, laundry, meals, and just kindness. And so that was most of the people that I met along the way, and I was so grateful to meet so many of them.
And how would you encounter them? Do they have like a little sign like hikers welcome this way, or give us an example of some of the people that you met and some of the encounters?
Yeah, so the people that are hosts on this trail, they have a website, and they can add or take off their name at any time to this website. And so you had to have access to a phone and contact them ahead of time, usually at least a day in advance. And from there, I would call them or send them a text and ask if their space was available. And then when I got close, I could call them and they could send me their address. Some of them were even nice enough to pick me up from the trail and come take me to their house. So that was really incredible.
That is cool. When I was doing some section hikes of the Appalachian Trail, sometimes you see trail magic, like at the end of a tough climb. I remember one time a church had left this big cooler just full of cold drinks that on a hot summer day was just amazing. But these people are actually taking you into their homes. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. I had heard about the trail magic on more commonly the Pacific Crest Trail, just because I met a couple other people that have done that trail. And they told me things like that, but there wasn't so much of the quote unquote trail magic here. It was more just the people that welcomed you into their homes. And my very first encounter with the trail angel, we stayed in this lady's front yard and just set up our tents in her yard. And they were a little bit more closed off. We didn't go into their house or anything, but she brought us out fresh fruit and cake and water, cold water, which after a long day hiking, that was amazing. And 3 days without fresh fruit, that was amazing. So it was just things like that. And of course it varied. Some people invited us, and one of my best experiences maybe was spending a proper Israeli Shabbat with a religious family. And so we had a huge meal for lunch and then another huge meal for dinner. And I just got to bond and experience their tradition and get to know their family and their lifestyle. And we just exchanged conversation back and forth all night. It was really incredible.
That's cool. For those that are not familiar with the term, what is Shabbat?
Shabbat is a religious event, I would say. It happens from Friday evening and goes until Saturday evening, and it's recognized all across Israel. It's when basically everything in the country shuts down. And as a religious aspect, the people that do practice Shabbat, they don't use technology, they don't use electricity, so they can't turn on and off lights. And the time is really spent to just be without distraction and be with your family, be with God, or be with whatever you need to be with, whoever you need to be with at that time. So it's a really interesting thing. And getting used to being in Israel and having Shabbat, that was hard to get used to on the trail a little bit because, of course, on Shabbat you couldn't go to grocery stores because everything shut down. And so we had to plan ahead for groceries and water and all of that as well.
Yeah, that Shabbat I will never forget after my time in Israel because I happened to be there. I think I was there for 3 Shabbats and 2. I was there for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and 3 Shabbats. I was like, everything's closed all the time.
Right.
Yeah,
you were there
it
doing
was really hard. So let's talk a little bit about how do you plan something like this?
That's a good question. The planning, I would say, was, I don't know, maybe I planned a little bit too much because I'd never done something like this. I really did a lot of research. I contacted as many people as I could to try to get more information. But I also started from the northern section, which is said to be the easier section. And that's because most of it, you're going through towns every single day or at least every other day. So you really don't have to plan so much in terms of food, water, places to stay, places to sleep. And so starting out, it was kind of like easing into it, which was really nice. And of course, the landscape, the terrain, it was a lot easier than the southern region, which is all the desert.
Right. And you also have to be better to have your skills already pretty fine tuned by the time you hit the desert because there is a lot of planning there, right? Because there's not access to water.
Exactly.
Did you learn from people on the trail, or is there like a guidebook that kind of assists you in this, or do you flail about and just kind of figure it out? How does all that work?
There is a guidebook that a lot of people use. It's referred to as the Red Book because it's a small red book written by a local guy. And he does a really nice job of breaking it down into sections day by day of what he recommends as good amounts of hiking to do for each day. And then it has listed where the closest grocery stores are, where you can get water, where you can sleep that day. But getting it in English was a little bit tricky and expensive, and it's not the most up-to-date thing. And so I got that to start, but I found that when I got there, I met people that I hiked with that were Israelis or knew different things that I didn't. And so at first it was a lot of just planning with other people and trying to learn from other people. And also talking to the trail angels because many of them had done sections of the hike or at least sections of the trail that are nearby them. And so mostly it was just talking to people and learning from there.
And when you started this journey, were you traveling solo and then you would meet up with people that you would hike with, or was it a mix of both, or how did all that work out?
Yeah, I went traveling solo. And of course, my parents were a little bit worried about that. My family, friends, everyone was a bit worried, but I started out solo. And on the very first day, I met a group of 5 people. And well, it was a couple separate groups, but altogether we were 5 people. And we ended up hiking together for a couple of days. And everybody kind of had their own plans, but me and this one other guy ended up hiking together for roughly 2.5 weeks or so. And when he left, I met this other guy that I hiked with for another week, and I hiked alone for a week or so, and so on.
Okay, so that sounds like the same as what I'm familiar with in the Appalachian Trail, that you can be solo but not alone for the most part, unless you choose to be.
Exactly.
And how difficult is this trail?
I was honestly surprised by how difficult it was. Another reason why I chose the Israel Trail was because I thought that maybe it would be, I wasn't expecting it to be anything like what we have in the US. I was expecting it to be like rolling hills and some nice desert landscape, like big sand dunes. I'd never been to Israel, so I didn't really know what to expect. But when I got there, I think the second or third day starting from the north, it's one of the highest mountains, the second highest mountain in Israel, Mount Meron. And that was just pure elevation right off the bat. And I was a little bit surprised by that. And then, of course, when you get to the desert, people say that the northern section is child's play compared to the desert. Because in the desert, you're going through these very, very steep, narrow canyons. You're climbing through water pits. You're climbing up and down thousands of feet of elevation every day. But it's definitely doable, obviously. I finished it and I met tons of people I met people of all ages that do these hikes from Israel and from out of Israel.
That mountain that you said was the second highest, how high was that?
I don't remember the exact elevation. And of course, it's coming from sea level. I want to say it was around maybe 4,000, 5,000 feet elevation.
Okay, so it's a real mountain. That would be comparable to our Blue Ridge Mountains around where I am.
Yeah, right.
Okay, and so let's talk about the landscape. So like you said, I mean, my vision too of Israel is, my whole vision of the Middle East was completely wrong to start with. But so tell us about the varied landscapes that you came across. So why don't you describe some of the things that you saw?
Yeah, so in the north, I was expecting to hike through forests, which I was, but I also hiked through a lot of agricultural areas. And so we were hiking through a lot of farmland and banana plantations. We hiked on and around and above the Sea of Galilee, which was really beautiful, possibly one of my favorite parts, at least in the north. And then there were also canyons up north that we had to hike through. That was something more like what I expected to see in the desert. And then in the middle of the country, you get to the beach and you hike along the beach for a couple of days into Tel Aviv, which is kind of cool. And the cool thing about the trail is it typically avoids the cities, but it skirts right around them. And so you have access to go into the cities if you want to. You go spend a couple of days being a tourist, so that's always nice. Taking a break if you want to. And then it goes through Jerusalem and into the Jerusalem hills, which were really beautiful. And I realized that right around there, that was one of the first days that I could remember that I really just saw nothing. No structures, no telephone poles, no people, anything like that. It was so quiet, which I didn't expect to see, especially around Jerusalem. So that was really nice. And then as you got further down into the desert, you start entering the desert and immediately you notice a huge change. You see these giant rock structures and huge red cliffs, sand everywhere, huge canyons. You see a change in the flora and fauna and also the animals that live there. And so it's not just the landscape, it's really everything. It's a lot quieter in the desert. There's no people. You're going through towns maybe every 4 or 5 days instead of every day. So that was a big change for me. And of course, there's no water in the desert either. So it's really just vast sand, rocks, massive mountains. The mountains in the desert are huge. So that really surprised me as well.
So let's talk about that. So you're 4 days between resupply stations. Water is 8 pounds or more per gallon, and in the desert you're going to need, and you're hiking all day, you need a lot of water. So how do you do this? How do you pull this off?
The food is not so bad. I didn't want to go into a town on certain days where I could have gone into a town, so the longest stretch that I carried for food was right at the beginning of the desert. I think I had like 7 days of food with me, and my backpack was so heavy. It was not worth it. I should have just gone into the town and hitchhiked into a town nearby or something, which is also very easy to do, luckily. But otherwise, food you really had to carry for 2 or 3, maybe 4 days. And the water, that was the biggest thing that you had to plan for, because the water, of course, like I said, there's no water in the desert. There's nowhere that you can get filtered water from even. And so you really have to plan for that. What I did and what most people do is they pay somebody. There's a lot of companies that will go store water in the desert for you. And so I got in contact with this guy that was amazing, very helpful, very kind. And we just contacted through WhatsApp. And I was able to pay him to go store like 6 to 8 liters of water in the desert for me. So every camp spot, I had water waiting for me. And that was really nice. And he would just send me the exact GPS location. And so I could just go to the campsite, drop my stuff off, make sure I could find my water, and I was good to go. So that was helpful for taking quote unquote showers also.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. So now, are there designated campsites, or what are the camping rules in Israel?
There are designated campsites. The main camping rule is that you're not allowed to camp in nature reserves or national parks. They're a lot stricter about that than in the US. And even in the national parks, you're not allowed to eat in undesignated areas. So that was really different than what I'm used to in the US. But for the camping, it was mostly in the north, mostly designated camp spots with picnic tables and fire pits and, the whole family gathering type situation. Usually somewhere right off a road, kind of loud, not very clean, which is always unfortunate. And then in the desert, instead of the picnic table type campsites, it was more just kind of a big blocked off area with signs saying this is the designated camping site. And it was just a big patch of dirt where you could kind of set up your tent wherever you wanted, really. There were some places where it kind of had rocked off pre-made campsites, and then other campsites that had built fire pits in the desert. And sometimes people would go drop off extra wood so you could build fires. So that was nice as well. I really liked the camp spots in the desert more than the north, because in the north, like I said, it was by road, so it was loud and noisy. There were people coming by and driving by in the middle of the night. It didn't always feel good as I was camping alone most of the time. In the south, it was quiet, it was peaceful, you could see the stars, and you really didn't hear anybody else around you.
It sounds like you were a little bit unnerved when you're close by the road. In fact, that breaks one of my personal backpacking rules, is I try to never make camp within 2 miles of a road. I figure if somebody can carry a case of beer, I don't want to be that close. And so it sounds like you didn't have that choice. So were you unnerved, or were there times that you felt unsafe?
There was one time when I was camping where, let me backtrack for a minute. So in the US, when I camp, I know what I'm doing. I speak the language. I can read signs. I'm usually in a car and I get to pick my campsites. I am with you. I usually go as far away from the road as possible and usually try to find some BLM land outside of a national park or something, outside of a designated campsite. So I can go way off into the middle of nowhere and go find a quiet spot. But in Israel, I guess you didn't always have to have the campsites, but that was where the water was. So I usually just stuck where the water was. And yes, there was this one campground where I stayed at, and it was on Shabbat. So there were lots of families there having their picnics, and then they all left. And I was alone this night. I wasn't hiking with anybody that day. And so I set up my camp like usual. I am very used to camping alone, which that's what I was trying to say with I'm used to camping alone in random areas. But I was camping alone that night, and there was a car that drove by. They got out of their car. They were maybe under the influence, and they came over, knocked all my stuff off the table, shook my tent. It was dark. So I started yelling at them, shined my flashlight at them, and they ran away. I think they were kids. I don't really know. So that was the only time I really felt unsafe, because also later that night there was a police officer that came and woke me up at like 1 a.m, shined their flashlight at me and started speaking in Hebrew. I told them I didn't know what was going on, and they were asking if there was anybody else in my tent. They were obviously looking for somebody, and then they ended up leaving. So that was a really bad night. 2 bad things happened at once. And that was the only time I've ever experienced something like that camping. Other than that, the camping was all wonderful.
Yeah, that would have unnerved me, no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah, I took a
that
couple
would have given
days
me
off
pause.
after
Yeah,
that.
I would have had to take a little break after that for a little bit and to regroup. So good
Mhm.
on you to be able to get your courage muscles back together and get back on the trail after that.
Yeah, thank you. I can add one thing, that in the north, the biggest issue we had was with animals, which wasn't so unnerving because I feel like I can handle animals. But we had wild boars in our campsite rubbing up against our tents one night. That was a little strange because I've never experienced wild boars before. So
Yeah, and
that was
that
the
actually
only
could have
other
been
night.
dangerous too, right? Because they have
Exactly.
tusks.
Yeah.
Yes, they can be a little aggressive, at least in some places that I know of about them.
Mhm. Right.
So I want to ask you, I want to backtrack when you talk about the water. So in my research, I saw that the Israel Trails Committee are the people that manage over 15,000 kilometers of trails, including this trail in Israel. Is there like a big container of water, or is there a spring, or what are they at these campgrounds? What is the water source?
Most of it comes from like normal water fountains like you'd see at a park. And so you could do that on at most of the campgrounds. In the South, they've started slowly adding big water tanks to some of the campgrounds that are really far down south. And so those are just huge tanks that you can fill up your water as much as you need. That's where most of the water came from. Sometimes I had to go into like a hotel or restaurant or a gas station and either buy or fill up my water there also. But most of the time, they were really good about having different water sources at least the campgrounds.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, a lot of times, at least, it looked like you're also hiking in a stream or what may be a dry bed during parts of the year, something like that. Did you bring a filter so you could filter water when you found water sources?
I did bring a filter, however, I only used it once. Yeah, there wasn't so much that you could filter because up north where there was water, it looked like most of the water was coming from streams that came from agricultural sites, and that just didn't seem like it would be the safest water to drink even with a filter. And so I just opted for either buying water or waiting until I had a water fountain.
Okay, yeah, I got Giardia once. I understand where you're coming from there. That was one
Yeah.
of my most unpleasant experiences of my life. So, and
Oh, I
Giardia,
bet.
if you're not, if you know what that is, that's a parasite that's often found in the water where there is the animals. So let's talk a little bit
Mhm.
more about the animals themselves. Outside of the wild boars, what kind of animals do you see along the trail?
Wow, I was so surprised by the animals there. They were incredible. I think I saw almost every type of animal that you could find in Israel. So they had hyenas, they had coyotes, which were also obnoxious when we were camping because they would just howl all night long. So I bought earplugs for those. But they had rabbits and snakes and fish, frogs, trying to think what else.
How about
Jackals,
birds?
birds, yes, lots of birds, foxes. Yeah, typical desert animals mostly.
Cool. And then I read too that in some of the areas that you hiked in, of course, you might have been a little bit early because you went in the winter, right?
Right.
Yeah. That in the springtime, they even have orchids, and there's lots of places with tons of spring flowers. Can you talk a little bit about some of the flowers that you might have seen?
Yeah, unfortunately, I went not during flower season. In fact, everyone that I met in Israel told me that I was crazy for going in the season that I did. So we didn't have too many flowers. However, there were some wildflowers that stayed blooming all winter long. And it was mostly really small little purple flowers. And then further down into the desert, there were some bigger pink and red flowers. I'm horrible with flower names, so I won't be able to name them,
Not a
especially because
problem.
they were all in Hebrew if I could read the name. However, I have heard that in the spring, the flowers that bloom are really, really amazing. Lots of orchids, like you mentioned. There's also lots of irises. Right around Tel Aviv, there's a couple iris based nature reserves that are just solely blocked off for the wildflowers. And so I've seen photos of those in bloom and they just look incredible. I would love to go back and see everything in the spring.
That would be cool. So, according to my research, I think November through May is when they recommend that you hike it. It's obviously way too hot in the summertime. As I found, I was there in
Mhm.
September, and it was really hot in the hikes that I did. So, you went in what month, and then what month, looking back, would you recommend? Oh, this is the best time to go.
So I actually kind of did it a little bit differently. I didn't do the entire through hike in one go per se. I did the north section from November to December. I did 4 weeks of hiking from November to December. And then I did the south section from basically 3 weeks in January. And I thought that November, this year apparently was particularly a very, very hot November. And so it was still 30 degrees Celsius or like 80, 80 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit when I was starting, which was way too hot to be hiking. So most days we were starting around 4 in the morning, starting before the sun came up and finding a nice spot for sunrise, which was actually really nice. But other than that, I think November is usually a really good time to hike. Most of the Israelis start late October after the holidays are all over, and then they'll hike north to south from October to December, or they'll usually hike south to north from February or March. They'll start and they'll finish in April or May. So that's usually the typical time. However, I really liked the times that I went. November was really nice. January was good. It got cold. It got very cold in the nights, and also it's flood season. And so the south flash floods a lot, so we really had to be careful and be aware and in contact with people to know about flash floods that were going to happen. Because if a flash flood comes in the desert and you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you could be swept away very easily. And there have been deaths on the trail because of flash floods. So we were really aware of that, and I wouldn't recommend people going during that time if you're not aware of what you're doing, if you're not used to hiking that type of environment.
So these are canyons that the waters would come through. Is that what we're talking about?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, good. So is there a way to find out whether or not you should be entering a canyon? When you say be aware, how would somebody even do that? Is there a website? Is there a place to call? Or
typically you're able to call the National Park Service there, and they'll be able to recommend if you can go into a canyon or not. I was lucky enough to be volunteering at a hostel in the desert the month before I did the January section, the southern section. And the guy that owned the hostel was extremely knowledgeable and helpful. And so he kind of became my point of contact. And I would text him every day and tell him the section I was doing. And he would give me the go ahead, or, hey, maybe you shouldn't hike this section that day. So there were a couple sections that I did end up skipping for safety purposes. But we kind of lucked out. And most of the days that I was hiking, the rain was always just kind of like a couple towns north of me, so it never really hit too hard. However, there were a couple of flash floods that I didn't see, but that were in the regions near me.
Is there rainy season? Is it like rain almost every day, or is it just something, this is the time when the rains come? This is the month they come, or how does that work? How's the weather work in Israel?
It's very different. It's very regional, which is maybe unique to Israel. I'm not too sure. But in the north, at least this year, it rained a lot. I guess it was a very rainy year. And there was actually some flooding in Tel Aviv that killed a couple of people this year. And so it was very unusual for that. But I guess most of the time it does rain on and off throughout December, January. That's usually the rainy season in Israel. In the desert, it doesn't rain too much, but if it's raining maybe 15 kilometers away from you, it could cause a flash flood where you're at. So you really just need to watch out for that.
Gotcha. Well, it sounds to me like if I do this, I want to do it in the spring to see the flowers, being a flower person. And so when I was there, of course, I was at the end of the summer, so everything was brown and dead looking. So I'd love to go back and see it when everything was green and lush and flowering and all that. Must have been amazing.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
I think it would be. I'm with you. I would love to go back in February, March and see it then.
if you had to, let's say most people can't just go away for a month and a half or 2 months that it might take to do the whole trail. If you had to pick, say, the top 3 sections that somebody, they want to go see the prettiest parts of this trail, what 3 sections would you recommend?
That's really tough.
Try.
I think hiking, I think the first week and a half or so of the trail in the north is amazing. And specifically around the Sea of Galilee up north was incredible. You go near a mountain called Mount Arbel, which was very difficult climb, as the first truly difficult climb up north. It puts you right on top overlooking the cliffs above the Sea of Galilee, so that's really, really amazing. So that section, and then probably the south in the desert. Definitely the last 5 days before Eliat were my favorite part by far, because that you go through Timna Park, which is famous, you go through the Eliat Mountains, and then of course you come and you get the incredible views of the Red Sea finally after all of this amazing, difficult hiking, and you finish at the Red Sea, which is incredible. Then maybe the third section I'd say is, just because it's Israel, I'd say from Masada National Park, which is also famous, and you're hiking above the Dead Sea. And then you hike down along the Dead Sea, and then after that you're climbing up through canyons and winding through slot canyons, through up onto cliff sides, all along the Dead Sea. So that's really, really amazing. And the entire time you're below sea level at that section.
Now, when I was in Jordan, which is on the opposite side of the Dead Sea, those cliffs along the Dead Sea too were spectacular. So I imagine, since it's the other side of the water, it's probably fairly similar, and that was just breathtaking.
Yeah, I'd imagine it's very similar.
Very cool. So did you ever have issues with getting lost? And tell us about the marking system. How do you know you're on the trail?
There were a couple times I got lost, not seriously, luckily, but yeah, you definitely got off the trail a couple of times. In the north, there's a lot more trails, and so it's a lot easier to take a wrong trail. But they have a marking system where they paint or put signs. It's usually painted on trees or rocks. And the marking is 3 stripes. It's orange, white, and blue. And when you're headed south, I think the orange stripe is the highest one on the 3. When you're headed north, the white stripe is the highest one.
And that's smart.
Correctly.
That is
Yeah.
smart. Yes, because a lot of times, let's say you step off the trail to go to the bathroom and you forget you're tired. It helps. Then you find out you've gone a long way. Oh man, I made the wrong turn out of the woods.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's brilliant.
So, yeah, that was really helpful. It's a pretty good marking system. The times that I did get lost, though, it was when there were other trails, because sometimes the trail follows the black trail or the red trail or the blue trail for a while, and you don't see so many of the Israel trail markings. And so you really need to know ahead of time which trail you're supposed to follow. But luckily, at least for Android phones, which I had, for Android phones, they have an app called Israel National Trail, and it has the entire map marked, and you can use your GPS locator. So if you get off the trail, then you can find it really easily, and you can direct yourself back to the trail. So that's mostly what I used. I also had physical maps that I used, but for just the little times I got maybe 50 meters off the trail or something and was walking parallel to it, I usually just used my app.
Cool. So you mentioned before that things were in Hebrew. Did you have much of a language barrier?
I didn't, actually. I was in Israel for 5 months and I barely picked up any Hebrew, which was horrible. But it's because almost everybody spoke English. And so most of the time I could find that I was able to speak English. There were a couple times where the signs were only in Hebrew, and so that was maybe the more difficult part, but luckily there's an app for that. Also, you can use your Google Translate.
There's an app for everything. It's changed travel forever.
Right. Exactly. So just if there was ever an issue, I used my Google Translate app and took a photo, and it translated pretty well for me. So yeah, the language barrier wasn't super difficult.
Okay. Can you tell us about your hardest day out there?
Well, mentally or physically?
How about both? Were there ever times that you said to yourself, what on earth am I doing? Why am I on this trail? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because not everything is rainbows and lollipops.
Mm-hmm. So I think my most mentally challenging day was a day that I thought that I could handle more than I could. And I started out very early, and I wasn't really sure where I was going to end because I was in the north. There were a couple different points that I could stop if I wanted to. But I was like, you know what? I think I can handle. I think it was 34 kilometers that day, which is 21 miles, 22 miles, somewhere around there.
It's a hard day.
Which was, yeah, very hard day. And I know that that's common for like the Pacific Crest Trail and things like that. People bust out 20, 30 miles, and I have no idea how they do it. But 20 miles was usually the absolute maximum for me. So anyway, I was hiking, and it was around noon. I finished the easier section, and I stopped in a town for lunch. It was also very hot that day because it was still in November. I think it was 30 degrees Celsius. And so I stopped for lunch. I took a longer break because I wanted to wait until the sun kind of went down a little bit. It wasn't right over my head because I had this big mountain coming up, Mount Tavor. And then after an hour and a half or so, I continued and I started climbing up the trail, and it was 1.5 miles or so. It was basically straight up this mountain, about 2,000, 3,000 feet straight up this mountain. And so I started off very, very slowly. I was listening to my music. I was listening to podcasts, trying to pump myself up. And finally, I get to the top, and I'm just dead tired. I'm out of water. And at the very top is this monastery. And I was like, okay, well, I'm here. I might as well go into the monastery. So I walk around the monastery and try to find the entrance, and I can't find the entrance anywhere. And finally, I find it, but I end up walking way more than I should. And I find the water that they have up there. So I get some water. I put on some more conservative clothes, and I try to go into the monastery, and they tell me I can't come in because my shorts are just barely above my knees, but my pants are in my bag, and I don't want to dig around. And so I was just very upset. It was frustrating for me. And then I had to go all the way back down the mountain. And at this point, I had 6 kilometers left, and it was getting dark. And I run to the bottom, and I go through this Bedouin community in the dark, and there's dogs running around, and I can hear people really close by. And I end up just going and setting up my tent. And I have a Fitbit. I ended up doing over 50,000 steps that day, setting up my tent in the dark and just falling asleep without eating dinner. So that day was mentally very, very difficult for me. It was just a lot. It was way too much, and I wasn't ready for it.
Now, all right, so I'm going to assume that you just crash when you get into bed. But in the morning, you wake up. So what are you thinking in the morning?
In the morning, I don't know. The days really varied. Some days I woke up and I was just not in a good mood, and I didn't want to hike. It was usually after I took a rest day. It's like coming back on a Monday to work. You're like, I don't really feel like going to work after this weekend. It's the same sort of thing after taking a rest day. But especially if the days were long and there wasn't that much in my mind to look forward to that day, it was really hard to motivate myself to hike. And I will admit that I did skip a couple of small sections just because there were sections that I was like, okay, I'm going through more farmland and I'm not so interested in that. And so I skipped a couple of very small sections to do that. But some days, if there was something cool to look forward to and I was just feeling really good, I felt great in the morning, and I would get started at 4 or 5 in the morning and just be happily walking all day long. So it really depended.
How did you mentally make yourself hike when you didn't feel like? I'm working on an episode right now on grit and resilience, which is one reason I'm kind of harping on this, because so many people give up on things and certain people don't. You're one that doesn't, because I know a thru hike is really hard. I don't care how, if the trail was easy, it's still hard to make yourself get up every single day, day after day, week after week, put on your boots and go out and hike. So how did you make the mental mind shift, or the mindset that I'm going to hike today, whether I feel like it or not, I'm hiking? How do you do that?
That's a great question. And I know that a lot of people have issues with that. It's a common thing, I think. So for me, the biggest thing was when I was having a really bad day and I just didn't feel like hiking and felt like sitting on my butt and being lazy all day, I had to tell myself, I had to really stop and think and tell myself, I am the one choosing to do this, and I don't have to do this if I don't want to. I know that I can quit this at any time. There's nobody telling me that I have to do this. And so it was really just me saying, this is what you chose to do. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to, but I'm stubborn. And so of course I'm going to do it. So that was mostly what I told myself. And I'm like, no, I have to prove to myself that I can do this. So that was the biggest thing. That was the biggest factor.
And then when you finally got to Eliat, I don't know if I'm saying that right, to the Red Sea, what does that
Mhm.
feel like?
Oh my gosh, getting to Eilat was the most wonderful feeling because the 2 days before that were possibly the hardest days physically. It was extremely, extremely difficult. And so after 2 months of hiking and covering all of Israel, seeing so much and experiencing so much, to finally arrive at the sea and come down and see just pure blue, sandy beaches right in front of you and be able to go jump into the Red Sea, it was the best feeling. I got emotional, and I don't really get emotional very easily, and so that was kind of a surprising feeling for me. But I was hiking and finished with 2 other people, and so I finished first. I went and got us a couple of beers, and we finished with a couple of beers and sat by the sea and watched the sunset. So it was really the best way to end the hike and the best feeling.
Perfect, perfect. What do you wish you had known before you started your journey?
I wish I would have known that people are so welcoming, and I really didn't have anything to be worried about, because going to Israel, you know, Western media presents Israel as an extremely dangerous place and a very place that you really shouldn't really consider traveling to, maybe, or you should be aware, hyper aware of all of your surroundings at all times, which of course traveling you should be aware of your surroundings. But I was just so amazed and surprised by how hospitable people were along the trail, particularly, but really in all of Israel. Israelis are very different in terms of their culture compared to what we see in the US, and it was not what I was expecting at all. So I wish I would have known, so then I could have just gone in with a very relaxed mind and helped my friends and family be more relaxed about it as well.
Yeah, you and I met in Golan Heights, which we're not even supposed to go to, and that was
Mhm.
fine.
Yeah, exactly.
So people are going to get mad at me if I don't ask you this question. Did you feel the need, or did you bring anything to protect yourself, any kind of a weapon or some mace or anything like that?
I did not, no.
Okay. Is that something that you feel comfortable? Because people always ask me, how are you going to protect yourself?
Mm.
And I don't either. And
Uh-huh.
is there a reason why you don't, or can you talk about that a little bit?
I think for me personally, I'm too trusting of people. I know that about myself. I say that I'm going to trust people until they give me a reason not to. And so I think usually it's the best way to go. I know that hiking, of course, is a slightly different circumstance. And when I'm hiking in the US, I'm usually carrying some sort of pepper spray or bear spray if I'm hiking in Montana or Alaska or something. But in Israel, I don't know, I didn't really want to spend the money on some sort of protection because I'm a budget traveler. So that was a big thing for me. I didn't really feel like it was an unsafe place. And after talking to Israelis that have done the trail, all of them told me that it was extremely safe and they never felt unsafe at any point. And so, had they said that they felt unsafe at certain points, or they experienced things that they wish they would have had something to protect themselves, maybe I would have gone out and found something useful to bring with me. But because I only heard positive reviews, that was another reason that really just solidified my decision to not need to bring a weapon.
And my research concurs with everything you just said. In fact, it basically said that once you're on that trail, you're like family to every other person hiking on that trail, and everybody's got each other's back.
Yep, exactly.
So good. So what do you do from here? Are you going to be doing more long distance hikes, or does that? How do you feel about long distance hiking after accomplishing this major goal?
I don't have anything planned right now. And so we'll see what happens in the future. But I think I would like to do another long distance hike. I'm not sure exactly which one, but I did meet a lot of people that have done the Pacific Crest Trail. And so I've been considering that, and at least a section of it. But really, I would like to travel more internationally and do a couple longer, like 2 to 4 week long hikes, more so than the longer ones, because I think 2 months was really, really nice and you got to see a lot. But I think I really enjoyed being in a different country doing a hike. And so I think I would like to do like the 2 to 3 weeks in France and Italy. And I talked to people that have done really amazing hikes in Australia, New Zealand, and different things like that. So maybe that will be my next longer hike, we'll say.
Oh, good. Well, I'm going to refer you. I'll try to remember to send you. And for those listening, I did an episode on walking holidays in general, how to do walking holidays where you're not backpacking. And then also I've covered, I don't know, umpteen different long distance trails on the Active Travel Adventures podcast. So there's lots of resources on the website. Just go to the directory and you can poke around there and find all sorts of great places to spur your interest and get some inspiration for doing a long distance hike or a walking holiday. So at this point, do you have anything that you'd like to tell us that I forgot to ask you about the trail, and any advice that you'd like to give us before we take off?
I just want to share one quick story about some people that I met that I forgot to share, because I know that your podcast is mainly focused on people who are maybe a little bit older, right? Is that right?
Well, the bar is set that I've got to do it. So by nature, a lot of us are a little older, but yes, not everybody, but yes. So go ahead.
So I want to share about this group of hikers that I met along the way that really inspired me. And it's just showing that anybody can do this trail, because it was a group of older people between, I'd say around their 50s was the youngest average age. And then the oldest guy, he was 82 years old. And it's a group of local Israeli hikers, and they get together 3 times a month, and they hike from the months of October to March. And they just do about 10 kilometers each time they get together. But over the period of 5 years, they're hiking the entire trail. And that was so inspiring to me, because the sections that I thought that I was just going to collapse and couldn't make it through, I thought about them and I'm like, oh, well, they've done this, so I can do it. And so that was really, really inspiring. And I hope that it inspires people listening to this or other people out there that really anybody can do it if you set your mind to it. So that's what I'd like to share.
Right. And most of it is in the mind. That's if I have to, I try to, the whole reason I do this podcast is I want to encourage people to do things like what you've done. We can do it. We just don't sometimes believe we can do the things that our bodies and our minds are capable of doing. And I just want people to get out there and try it. You'd be astonished at what you can accomplish if you would just set your mind to it. Like you said, put in the training, do what you got to do, and then just get out there and do it.
Exactly.
Well, I sure appreciate you coming on the show today. I think it's sparked a lot of interest in Israel. And do I have like another 2 minutes if you can just you lived in Israel for such a long time. And as a Westerner, I know I had some preconceived notions that were completely off base, and everybody's all scared when I went over there. Give us the elevator pitch on Israel and visiting Israel.
Wow. So as somebody from the US visiting Israel, I think it's extremely welcoming, particularly from the US. And you're able to travel very, very easily. The public transportation is amazing, although Israelis would disagree. But coming from the US, where our public transportation is not so great, it's extremely easy to get around. You can get to Jerusalem, get to Tel Aviv, get to Eliat, get to the mountains, and really everywhere you want to go. And it's just so diverse. Really, Israel is such a special place because of the diversity in the people, but also in the landscape. You can be in the mountains, in the desert, by the beach, whatever you want to be within 4 or 5 hours, I'd say. You can even ski in Israel, so that's kind of cool. Although I did not ski. I found it an interesting concept, so I didn't go up there and try it myself. But the people there are amazingly friendly. Once you get to know them, once you kind of break them out of their shell and get them to talk a little bit of English to you, they're so friendly, so welcoming. And I was so incredibly surprised by just how warm and kind Israel is. So for anybody debating going and wondering if it's safe or not, it really is safe. I know that there's a lot of issues going on politically all the time, but particularly now, it's not really stopping anybody from traveling Israel. In fact, I've read some articles, and people traveling to Israel, it just keeps going up and up and up. And so don't let media stop you. It's so worth it, and you have to see it.
Sounds great. Thanks again for coming on the show. I sure appreciate it.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Malia. A few more comments on hiking the Israel National Trail. You're going to need to purchase and bring with you the book, Hike the Land of Israel, Israel's National Trail, more commonly referred to as the Red Book. This is the guidebook to the trail. Not only does it include all the pertinent information on hiking the trail, but also includes detailed maps. Also, you need to download the INT Map app, which you can get available on Apple or Android. This way you can use your phone to assist in navigation. But you can't just count on the phone. You could drop it or lose it. Like I lost my phone 2 weeks ago in the woods when I was hiking, and it was in airplane mode, so I'll never be able to find it. So you can't count on your phone either having the charge or staying safe the whole time. You might, like I said, you might break or lose it. So always have the paper map in addition to the map app. Also very important, you should sign up for the Israel National Trail Forum. This is your go-to guide to conditions on the ground at that time. It's critically important for when you're crossing both the mountains and the desert to know what the weather's going to be. You want to be prepared, and you need to be particularly alert for rain events that are upstream of you as you're entering desert canyons so you don't get caught in flash flood. Super important. We want you to do this safely. In addition, I would download Google Translate in the Hebrew, and I would also download Arabic because you might go to some Arabic towns, and that's helpful as well. English is very widely spoken, but signs may only be in Hebrew, which I found indecipherable, so the app is crucial. With Google Translate, you can point your phone's camera to the sign or the restaurant menu, and it'll translate it for you. Easy peasy. Makes travel so much simpler. Israel, the country, is a fascinating and historical place, so please try to allow time to explore Jerusalem, which the trail goes right through Jerusalem, so that makes it super easy. You're not even going out of your way. Maybe take some R&R and explore the city life in Tel Aviv, where you're likely to be flying in and out of anyway. One really important thing to know, really big thing to know about Israel. As Malia mentioned, Shabbat is the Jewish Sabbath, or their day of rest. It starts at sundown on Friday and goes through Saturday. Virtually the entire country shuts down. Every single week, every single Friday night, all day Saturday. So you must plan your food and whatever purchase needs that you have ahead of time, or you're going to be hungry or not able to get it. Just literally everything is closed. I spent the month of September in Israel, and not only did I have 4 Shabbats to go through, but I also had 2 holy seasons, including Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. While I certainly appreciate the devoutness, I would not recommend going in September unless you're Jewish and wanting to go there for holy reasons. Because if you're not doing it for there, it's a real pain to try to circumnavigate around all these holy days in the month of September. It's also a very hot time, so it's not fun to be there anyway. Again, October is going to be the earliest you really want to go there. Another note, the buses are very safe to ride in Israel, but I also found it very helpful to ask locals the times and the schedule, because sometimes the printed schedule that would be at the bus stops is a bit confusing for me. But the locals will be helpful, and they'll help you get around. They're super safe and easy. And like I said, that being said, even though sometimes I had problems reading the signs, I had no problems getting around. And again, also, look at the timetable and make sure you're allowing plenty of time to get to your destination before the buses shut down for Shabbat. I'll have more details about all this in the Israel National Trail Travel Planner that will coincide with this episode. It'll give you the details you need to prepare for this hike. Also the links to get the apps and the Red Book, etc. You get access to this travel planner and all of the travel planners I put together by getting my once-a-month newsletter. I don't spam you or sell your information. It's just an easy way for us to communicate. Most of today's major long-distance trails are so crowded. The INT has only been around since the 90s, so not even 30 years maybe? It's not heavily trafficked, so it's a wonderful way to experience the challenge, the beauty, and the introspection you get that a long hike can offer, without the big crowds. History buffs are going to love the ancient stories and the region's importance to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. I also strongly encourage you to visit Jordan, as I absolutely loved my time there. Again, links are in the show notes. I hope you've enjoyed learning about Israel's National Trail. Many thanks to Malia for coming on the program. And I also want to thank you for using my links on the website and in the show notes and planners, as some of them, at no additional cost to you, are helping to support this program and to keep it ad-free. Please use my Amazon link to access Amazon. Then buy whatever you want. You don't have to buy what's on the page that you use my link. Just if you go to Amazon using my link, I get credit for whatever you do buy. Also, I would encourage you to use my travel insurance quote comparison link. That'll help you figure out quick and easy and without giving them personal details. They don't even know who you are unless you decide you do want to buy something. It's a super easy way to compare policies and prices. And of course, I encourage you to use my affiliate tour companies when you're heading out on your next adventure. Thanks. And thanks again for listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!